Welcome to the Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. We're here to share stories of real river accidents and rescues and find expert advice on how to solve the problems you might encounter in the Whitewater River environment. I'm your host, Jack Diddy, an emergency medicine physician, whitewater paddler, and wilderness medicine educator. Together, I hope we can celebrate successful rescues and learn from our mistakes in a supportive environment. If you have a story to share of a non-fatal accident or rescue, send me an email at thesafetybreak@gmail.com or contact me on our Facebook page, The Safety Break. If you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button and follow us on social media. I hope you learned something valuable in the show. This episode about the Russell Fork was mostly recorded and just about ready to publish when the unimaginable disaster of Hurricane Helene struck our region of the Southeast. It's hard to truly understand the losses that so many people here have incurred. But in the depth of all this loss and uncertainty, I've seen our community come together more than ever before to help solve the staggering problems of the region. Maybe it's because of the deep connections to the rivers, but many of the paddlers in the southeastern river community have been leading the charge to help those most affected by the storm. In the next few weeks, I hope to present some information about river safety issues in the region as it relates to the storm and our interaction with these changed river environments. As paddlers start to venture out, I would urge significant caution for many obvious reasons. But I'm certainly looking forward to the days when we can get out there and freely explore these amazing places. In the meantime, there's a lot of work to be done to start the recovery process. The Russell Fork River is no stranger to devastating flooding, but was fortunately spared this go-around, and the dam release season there is in full swing. Hopefully there's some useful information for those that may be paddling it this month.
I would say there are decades of my paddling life that if you asked me where my favorite place to go and paddle would be, it would be the Russell Fork. Just for so many reasons. Every bit of that river is visually just spectacularly beautiful. And there's this local crowd of just awesome people. The locals tend to like kayakers. And when you get out of the river, you're basically where you're camping most of the time, or at least early on you were, and all your friends were there. It was just the perfect paddling day.
For me, the Russell Fork will always be a special place. It's where I cut my teeth as a young paddler, learning how to make precise moves and consequential drops, and making some tight friends along the way. Together in that community, we navigated many joyous trips through this magnificent river gorge, and there was music at night around some roaring campfires. But we also encountered some deep tragedies on and off the river in that small community. As an example, the Lord of the Fork race that occurs there now is named after our friend John Lord, who drowned there at Towers Rapid in 2004. So this place represents to me the collision of joy and agony in paddling, and is a fitting site to consider risk and reward in our sport. And this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Russell Fork Rendezvous, one of the best whitewater parties ever created. In this episode, we're going to hear of a close call and rescue at Fist Rapid. But first, let's get some background about the river and about these great events. If there's any one person that embodies the spirit of the Russell Fork, it's Brent Austin. He's been there since the beginning of the race and of the rendezvous. He's been a longtime supporter of American Whitewater, serving on its board of directors for many years. And if you want to know where to find him at the rendezvous, just follow the sound of the drums, weave through a crowd of swirling dancers, and look for a temporary structure made of tarps and tapestries. He'll be there with a huge smile on his face.
My first experience in the Russell Fork Gorge was in 1989. I had just learned to kayak, but I went in there for the first time in the fall of '89 with an R2 with a character named Dave Martin. We called him Treehouse Dave out of Friendsville, Maryland. And it was on that trip that I, first saw the river and thought about, how this was at that time still over my skill set. But but saw individuals like John Regan running El Horrendo every which way but loose, and he was loud and stoked even then. And my first kayak trip down the Russell Fork Gorge was in the fall of 1992. I paddled with, I think, my Kentucky crew. That first trip was Mike Clark, Rich Reddy, a bunch of Kentucky folks from BWA and Vikings, Rich and Lynn Lewis, Don and Dan Copeland, and maybe Maria Matthews. I can't recall. But anyway, we paddled, kayaked it. I remember the excitement of being down there, making it down the gorge, and my friends telling me that, yes, you're going to run El Horrendo. If anything, you're going to run El Horrendo. And just great day that day, and fell in love with it. Just as an aside, 1992 was the last year I went to see the Grateful Dead, because even kayaking trumped that experience. And so, we were all of a sudden at the Russell Fork Gorge in the winter and the spring, not just the fall. And somewhere in that range, we started talking about the race, because we would do these cruising laps where we would cruise the Russell Fork and then run another lap, and it just became part of the experience. And I like to joke about, because it's kind of true what happened. Although we were talking about the race generally, but Mike Clark and I had raced down from Garden Hole to Ratliff Hole just to see how fast we could do it. Roughly 39 minutes. We didn't measure it exactly. And we told Chris Hipgrave, who was one of our paddling partners and friends then. He was younger and better than us. And he came back and announced that he had done it in 32 minutes. And, Chris is very competitive. We weren't as competitive. But anyway, we figured that age and treachery could overcome youth and ability. So we lied to him and said we did it in 29 minutes. And he called us out on it immediately. I don't believe you. And so, but anyway, we started talking about doing the race, and that's kind of how we started talking about doing that in 95. The course we had figured out, because we had people like Joe Griner, who was an old CCC and AW member, and just he was an older than me, but really good paddler. And he was really involved in helping us with timers and how to figure out where the course was, and getting us some bibs from AW or somebody. I can't remember now exactly, but we looked at the course. We put in right above slot. Today that's called Let's Make a Deal, but that was slot back then. And there was up on River Right Bank, there was a nice little shelf that we could all line up on. At least 15 or 20 of us could, and more. We ended up having about 30 racers for quite a while, for a number of years thereafter, and take off. And then the finish line today is the finish line we came up with for that very first race down below Climax at that big rock.
One of the most remarkable things about those first races was the presence of wave hoppers on the course. These are blazing fast boats, but are very difficult to maneuver and unforgiving, to say the least. Here's our friend Eric Hendrickson's memory of it. Eric is a longtime paddler of the Russell Fork, and along with our good friend Willie Witt, really helped form the backbone of the Lord of the Fork race in the last 2 decades.
That year, I remember, I believe that would have been 97, that Jeff Snyder and Chris Hipgrave and Boone Brothers all paddled wave hoppers. And, Fist was still a very narrow line, but they all really held it together. And I don't think Fist was by far the hardest move in a wave hopper. I think probably getting through Maze was the hardest place, as far as just these little ferry moves you have to do around a lot of rocks in a long boat with very little rocker. And maybe even more difficult than that was the Buffet Tower, the mainline Buffet Tower. And I had the privilege of watching Chris Hipgrave go off that in a wave hopper one time, and all I can describe it as was he carried a lot of speed, and when he hit the drop, he flew. The whole boat was in the air. It was just, that's impressive. And I had that in my mind when I tried it in a Mirage, which is just a little bit shorter, like 7 inches shorter. And I did not fly. I went down and stuck my bow in the water and got swept over and chundered in the hole.
As the race was taking off in popularity, so was the scene off the river, with Brent turning the gears.
the 1994, the BWA had its fall party for the first time at the Russell Fork instead of at the Ocoee. And that was a whole big fight and political drama, but we ended up over there, and people were banging on pots and drums, and we were having a great time in the Russell Fork, and we decided that the next year we would rendezvous and come back in 95, and that was really the first rendezvous and the first race. And but it kind of all came together because, we would be hanging out at Ratliff Hole, and in the early 90s too was just phenomenal. I mean, the music was just great down there. There was it was like an annual pilgrimage, Ratliff Hole. In fact, my good friend Chris Hull termed it the sanctuary, and every time I'd see him, until this past year when he passed, we'd always talk about the sanctuary, and it was just music, and kids would just be running around coming in from the New River Gorge and from the Golly, and it was just where a lot of people came together, and there was big giant fires being put on by this open boater named Paul Fantetti. Just as an aside, by 1999 we had crowd sizes of up to almost 1,000 people, so it was a big growing event at this point in time. I remember Joe Greiner coming in and talking to me in 1997, saying, "Wow, this is quite the event here. We weren't calling it a festival; it was a rendezvous." And I think we may have been the first quote river rendezvous in the country. I had kind of come up with the name because I had been fascinated with the mountain men rendezvous in the 1830s, and so I just thought, well, let's just don't be another festival; let's be a rendezvous. So that's kind of how we got the name. And there was some issues with dams and some gas drilling that came along later on that really kind of brought a lot of attention and desire by some of us to bring awareness to the river corridor and some of the the other opportunities for outdoor recreation besides just paddle sports. And so that's kind of how the genesis of the race and the Russell Fork Rendezvous that first year in 1995.
While Brent and crew were creating the race and the rendezvous, my first experience of the Russell Fork Gorge occurred around that same time period, but not in a whitewater boat. I spent many weekends in the previous 2 years exploring the creeks and rivers of my home state of Kentucky in a 17-foot open canoe, following an old guidebook written by Bob Sellinger. In that book, the Russell Fork Gorge seemed like an untouchable place for that kind of craft. But I wanted to see it firsthand, and after gathering a few of my closest friends for the adventure, we drove down there and set off on foot into the gorge on a warm summer day, starting at the put-in at Garden Hole. We carried no food or water, no headlamps, no map, and no knowledge of any landmarks, just the crazy determination and blissful ignorance that 18-year-olds can possess. Needless to say, it turned into an epic misadventure, and we ended up hiking and even swimming down the river in the dark before finally reaching an escape at Grassy Creek at about 2 o'clock in the morning. I was, of course, hooked, and after the poison ivy healed, couldn't wait to come back with the skills necessary to paddle the river. The first description I can find of a river descent of the Russell Fork comes from Randy Carter in his 1967 River Guidebook. He says, "This is a daredevil run for fools only, with a difficulty rating of 7 for the worst mile." Now, Class 7 was not really defined on the 6-point scale in his book, but needless to say, he lined or portaged most of the rapids on that first canoe trip. A half-century of progress in our sport has made the rapids on the Russell Fork seem a lot more manageable, but the consequences for missed lines remain. Huge undercut boulders stand out prominently in the river, and one of the most imposing of these is at a rapid called Fist.
Fist is basically a flume that goes directly into a cave that is formed by two gigantic boulders, the bigger one being downstream and a smaller one upstream leaning against it. And it's very easy to see as you approach the waters just disappearing into that cave between the boulders. But probably the more significant part is what happens upstream of that. So there's, I would say, probably Class 3 type rapids between Tower and Fist. And as you approach Fist, you're kind of divided into approaching from the right or the left. And some people bail out over a shallow, surgy ledge on the right. That's called the fire escape. And, the thing that has been true lately and was true when I first started paddling it, and there was a period of time where it was not true in the middle, was if you just were to sit in the water above the drop and let it take you where it was going to take you, you could be as far right as you could be in the river, and it would take you all the way across and into that cave. So that's the like visual gravity of looking at the rapid and understanding that. And you can run any line you want, and if you are unsuccessful or don't clear the line or get down below the rapid, you have a good chance of being carried into the cave.
The stream bed of the Russell Fork is a dynamic and unstable place. This is at least in part due to the practice of blowing up ledges with dynamite in the early part of the last century to facilitate timber transport down the river. Some early pictures of the river show smooth ledge-style drops where there are now just piles of boulders. Paddlers often notice subtle changes in the rapids after high water events shift the rocks around.
My first year paddling the Russell Fork was 1996. Fist was a tight line. There was still commercial rafting at that time too, and watching the rafts come through was pretty made you a little bit nervous because in my mind, a clean line in a boat really had your stern within a couple feet of the rock as you went by the cave, and it was really just a kind of a left to right downstream ferry as you went. I raced it the next year and I bailed out, where people go over what's called the fire escape on the right. I remember bailing out over the right side and my stern hit up against what we used to call the fan rock. And it was just this rock that displaced water vertically in this just beautiful spray up into the air. From that point on, I always paid attention to the rock because it was visually just special. And that seemed to continue on. I don't remember what year it first changed, but the first change I remember was that fan rock just fell over downstream and there was no longer a spray up into the air. And it turned into this wide line that was open to the point where the main jet of current no longer seemed to go into the cave. It went a little bit to the right of the cave, and it seemed to get easier each year for a number of years, and to the point where I clearly remember my race line would be to enter the rapid pretty much anywhere, and once I was on the main tongue of water going down towards Fist Rock, I would turn my boat right at the rock and point to the corner just to the right of the cave, because that's where all the fast current was. In my mind, it seemed like the line was just getting easier and easier, and we would talk about it as really not one of the big rapids on the river anymore. And apparently right around 2010, or somewhere between 2009 or 10, that all changed. I don't know exactly what rocks moved, but the water formed this very sizable boil, and it seemed like if you didn't break the boil at any point, you were just going to get typewritered into the cave. And I remember coming down that year and somebody said, "Fist has changed, you're not going to want to run it." And I dismissed them thinking, this will be no problem, of course I'll run it. I got down there and looked, and I didn't even have to think. I just knew I was not going to run it.
We had a tough decision to make that year. This was the site of a prior fatality, at least one successful drowning resuscitation, and numerous close calls in the past. And now the line was even tighter. How many times would most good paddlers miss this move? I figured it was about 1 in 50. And we had 60 people signed up to race through this exact spot that year. So I didn't like that math. And while there are a couple of sneak lines available, these also had risk and were much slower, so the racers would have a lot of incentive to take the riskier mainline move. And the safety plan for the race back then was pretty loose. We always tried to recruit people to stage at some of the more consequential drops, but this plan would often disappear in a cloud of smoke on race day. It was hard to find people to set up safety at Towers, Fist, and Mays. We usually had at least a few reliable regulars like Gerald DeLong, Dave Allnut, and Damon Patterson with a rope at the top hole of Triple Drop, but the vast majority of the course was a solo affair. So with this in mind, and after consultation with a lot of the racers, we ultimately decided to move the race start a few hundred yards downstream of this rapid. The downside of that decision was that it shortened the race course, cutting off several minutes of a very fun section, and broke with 15 years of tradition. I know some people weren't happy with the change, and I still second-guess that decision sometimes. But I can tell you that with each year that passes and with more experience in the sport and in life in general, I'm pretty comfortable that it was the right thing to do. The type of decision we made about the race course back in 2010 is encountered over and over again as you progress through the layers of this sport. There's a constant balance between risk and reward that we have to contemplate as we encounter dangerous features on the river and push the limits of our skills. Nowhere is that conflict more crystallized and apparent than at a place like Fist. Every paddler that runs the river is capable of making that move correctly over and over again. But every paddler that runs that river is also capable of screwing that move up a small percentage of the time. And you never know when that is going to be. So that brings us to the rescue story for this episode. I'll let our guests introduce themselves, Max and one of his rescuers, Ellie.
So my name's Max. I've been paddling out in Colorado for a couple years now. Was a rafter before I started kayaking, and then got more and more into kayaking as I was more in the whitewater scene. Started paddling class 5-ish this about a year and a half. And then this trip was actually my first time paddling out east. So, it was great. The rivers are stylistic, a lot different than what I was used to, but amazing. Like the Russell Fork, I truly love the river and still do. And I paddled Fist 4 or 5 times maybe. I walked it the first couple, and then was comfortable on it. And I think that kind of plays into a part of potentially why the event occurred, is maybe a little bit too much comfort. And I would say not a lot of people were walking in the group that I was with. But I've read most of the guidebooks, especially out east, and they talk about that specific cave off to the left. So I definitely knew of it.
My name is Eleanor Ansbach. I go by Ellie. I've been running the Russell Fork Gorge for over a decade. The Breaks Interstate Park is there, and there's a really nice community there. It's visited for the leaf peeping. A lot of people go to look at all the leaves because the colors are unbelievable during October season. It's one of the most beautiful places, I think, on earth that I've visited thus far. And it is the section of river, the gorge itself is class 5. Primarily, there are class 4, but also very dangerous class 5 parts of the river. I've ran it at extremely low flows in the summertime, and I've also ran it up to 1,300. A lot of people have ran it even farther than that. And you can go on an overlook and see down, and it's this gigantic U shape, and it's absolutely beautiful. But once you're down in the gorge, it's just unbelievable the amount of rocks that have, the formations that have been made. It's pretty unbelievable to be in the gorge kayaking, but it is dangerous. So I was going to do an all-women's event to show people down the gorge the following weekend. So I had synced up with the other co-instructor, Leslie, and another person named Anna, and it was kind of overcast. There weren't very many people there as well, just because it was kind of an off weekend, because the last weekend is the race, and it's quite a distance for most people in the Southeast to get to Eastern Kentucky, Western Virginia. And we put on the gorge, and everything was going fine. We were going through the rapids, and once we got to Fist Rapid, we were portaging. You portage around the left side of the rapid, and I primarily portage this particular rapid. I've actually, at low flows, extremely low flows, like 100 CFS, I've actually swam into this cave where the incident happened. So the way that the rock is formed, it backs up. One rock backs up to another rock that creates a cave where the water flows under there, and sticks and debris can get under there as well.
There's another line at Fisk that we haven't really mentioned yet. On the far left side of the river, just in front of the cave, is an eddy. Some paddlers drive into this eddy, collect themselves for a moment, and then do an upstream ferry back across, just in front of the cave entrance. At low water levels, it's an easy move. But during the flow of the October dam releases, the current has a bit of a surge to it, making it a lot dicier. This is the line that Max chose. He was paddling a full-volume creek boat, and the water level was roughly 800 CFS.
Probably just went in a little bit more lackadaisical than I should have after paddling it a couple times, and it's a very easy looking move, other than the consequence that does happen there. And essentially just an upstream edge, I just didn't have it high enough up, and it just threw me right back into the cave and kind of pinned me up. Was kind of splatting to an extent for a while. It felt like I was still in my boat upside down. So my bow was above the cave, and then the stern was kind of with me. And then I pulled my skirt. Pretty much once I felt that current push me under, and that current is very strong under there. It doesn't look like there's a lot of water, but it's definitely not a spot you want to be. Once you feel that stern go under, it's a terrifying feeling. I was in there and kind of got some bearings on the top of the Fisk cave, got a good handhold, and just try to get a sense of where the heck I was at underneath. And then, the water's probably up to my neck in there. So I still was above the water pretty much the whole time. So my head was, at least. So at that point, my head is above the water, and then shoulders below are underwater. And then so I had about a plyo ball, maybe a volleyball sized head area room. So I was able to look around and kind of get my bearings to see exactly where I was at and kind of get control of my emotions and myself and figure out like what to do here.
Below the rapid, I'm in the eddy, and there's a rock across from the Fisk cave. And it's in the middle of the river. A lot of people get out to either scout or to hang out. I noticed my friend Ryan was in his kayak next to the rock. And I see that he is quickly getting out of his boat, and he blows his whistle once. And then within that second or two, he blows his whistle 3 times. So then I get my rope out of my kayak, because I'm already out of my kayak, and I tell Anna and Leslie we need to get to the top of the rock, because the best way to get to this spot is above. So when we get up to the top, my first judgment call was we need to get a rope to him. So what I didn't know is how high the water level was and how much debris and sticks were in there, and the force of the water and how it was. It was just overall not a great vantage point to get to him at all. And there was no one else around. It was, I think 6 people total, maybe 7 in the entire group when we first, from the time that he went in the cave, by the time that he got out, there was no one else around except for that original 6 or 7 people.
Unfortunately, at the cave entrance, the water is very chaotic and just about even with the ceiling, so it's not easy to get a rope in there. It may not be visible to the person underneath. The other complicating factor for anyone inside the cave is that the downstream exit is not easy to find. It's a tunnel that's about 15 feet long with a downward sloping roof, making it a very difficult proposition for a swimmer. Luckily, some of the water forms a bit of an eddy in the upstream left portion of the cave, and there's another escape route. This is just a small crack on the left bank, near the front entrance of the cave, but usually completely covered in debris.
Yeah, so once I was under there and kind of figured out, okay, calm myself down, get a feel of what's going on, I just, took a glance around, and this is kind of just instincts and understanding where I was at, because I approached that cave, just portaging it before. I looked to my right, and it was, pitch black. I could not see the downstream exit. So kind of marked that one off the checklist of I'm probably not going to go there and try to swim out of that. There was a small hole of light coming through. I would say about a ping pong ball, maybe like a baseball sized light punching through upriver. So I just made my way slowly over there using kind of rock climbing in a sense, and very securely making my way over to that light because I knew that was, in theory, my best option. And there was also less water moving under there. So in theory, too, again, that felt like the safer option in that sense. And then once I kind of understood where I was at, that gave me a little bit of, a sigh of relief of like, okay, I messed this one up bad, but like you got to focus, control your emotions here, and figure out a way out of this. So that upstream hole was the cave itself that was putting in light, which was all rocks. So I get back there, I realize, okay, I can't squeeze through that. What are my next options? And after seeing the cave from the portage, I remember seeing all like the brush and wood and mud that was at this point above me. And there was, again, probably like a ping pong ball size light of loose mud, wood, soda cans, debris, pretty much. And I could slowly kind of make my way while safely being positioned in the rocks, kind of in a rock climbing stance, I would say. So I was secure, a good foothold, a solid handhold, and then I had a free hand. And I'm completely out of the water at this point. I have some water running through my shoes, but at that point I kind of thought to myself, like, you're going to get out of this. Just slowly take your time. Don't make any drastic movements and just work your way up, digging out through that mud to where that hole became bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the biggest thing for me was I didn't want to pull down a log on top of me when I'm underneath it, and it's going to force me down into the water below. So I was being very cognizant and very, I would say like a Jenga piece, an upside down Jenga piece of logs and dirt. Found a football in there. So
most of the time, the wonderful locals of the Russell Fork, they'll dig out this the debris, and it's about 5 feet of debris, and it's a crack. So just a big crack in that goes down to the shore, and it's debris, it's sticks and everything, dirt. And so I'm yelling rope, and I'm saying, Ryan, throw the rope out, just thinking maybe he could get to the mouth of the cave, but that's not working. And I'm yelling, can you hear me? And I'm yelling, and I'm trying to make loud noises because I guess for some reason I thought maybe he could hear me. And so then about 5, 7, 8 minutes rolls around, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is not great. This is awful. And we're kind of panicking at that moment because I know a lot of time has passed. And then we hear this from Max is down here. And thankfully we were able to get to the pile. I called it the grave. It's pretty much a grave of dirt, just a huge pile of sticks and dirt. And Ryan jumps down and he starts to pretty much front load like a bulldozer, just both hands digging all the dirt and debris and sticks. And Anna is helping too. And we're pulling off the sticks and dirt and debris. And we finally see his hand. And then we start digging more, and we're digging, and we're standing on this. So it's not great that we're standing on it, but at the same time, it's probably, for the best that we're, digging this out and also getting him out of this. So then we finally pull half of his body out. So he's up to his shoulders. So he's able to get out, and we pull him out, and he's completely covered head to toe in dirt. He pretty much looks like a coal miner. you can only see the whites of his eyes because he's covered in so much dirt and debris. And that is how we got him out.
The air pocket described in this story may not be there at 1,000 CFS, so you can't count on that on those higher release days. And the debris that's stacked in that backdoor exit changes with high flow events. And at last check this year, it was completely blocked up again. There's a picture of this debris pile and of the rapid itself on our Facebook site if you want a better visualization of what's going on. Max came out ultimately unscathed.
Just want to say thank you to all the people on the Russell Fork that day. And the crew that was there, like, I'll forever be thankful for them and, hopefully continue to paddle with them. The river itself is, beautiful, and it's such great paddling. Like, I'll definitely go back, but I'll just always walk fists moving forward. And I've heard this as well, is like the locals line is to walk it because they know someone that hasn't been on their game one day, and it's just not been a great time for them and their paddling partners.
In the mountaineering world, abandoning a summit attempt when it doesn't feel right is generally a well-respected decision, and really a mark of maturity and wisdom for seasoned climbers. Portaging a dangerous rapid is a similar type of decision. When highly skilled paddlers are contemplating running a rapid with truly life-threatening consequences, anything less than 100% certainty of the move prompts a decision to back down. The feeling that I'm probably going to make it is not good enough in that type of environment. Luckily, most rivers and rapids are more forgiving than this, and you can get away with that looser mentality a lot of the time. But it's important to recognize and acknowledge those places on the river where the stakes are a lot higher and adjust your mindset accordingly. I've seen a lot of accidents occur where this lack of mental adjustment seemed to be the core mistake. So this about wraps up our story today. As I mentioned earlier, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Russell Fork Rendezvous. The race is still going on as usual, thanks to Jeff Calhoun and the Great Falls Foundation. The rendezvous itself will be a little different this year because of the issues here in the Southeast. I happened to run into Bob Larkin, the organizer of the rendezvous for the past decade, and he had this to say about it.
All right, so we were planning the 30th anniversary of the Russell Fork Rendezvous, something that Brett Austin started 30 years ago. Worked all year on it, but most of our patrons come from the North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia area that have been the most affected by the flooding. So we decided to not proceed with the festival. We decided to cancel the festival. We still have a lot of events going on at the Rattler Folk Campground. When we do that, we call it the non-neveu instead of a rendezvous. And a lot of people say that they actually prefer the non-neveu to the rendezvous because it gets pretty wild down here.
So there's still an event happening that last weekend, and they're donating the funds from it to flood relief. I have a feeling the bonfire is going to be enormous this year. If you're not into Class 5 paddling, the Russell Fork is still an awesome place to visit. We all owe a huge thanks to Park Superintendent Austin Bradley and all the other staff at the Break Center State Park for being so welcoming and creating a great experience for us and for all the visitors to this place. There's a ton of other stuff to do there, including river sections that are Class 2 to Class 4 in difficulty, beautiful hiking trails, and some recently developed and supposedly very high-quality rock climbing. It's really the crown jewel of the Kentucky and Virginia state park systems. I think that most paddlers that have immersed themselves in the sublime scene of the Russell Fork understand that the real reward has only a little bit to do with the whitewater, and a lot more to do with the magical vibe of the community that forms there every weekend in October, year after year. I hope to see you all there. And while I usually don't have any ads on here, let's give Brent the last word with a plug for American Whitewater.
Because AW is our champion for paddle sports. We're out here enjoying a lot of rivers because of what those guys have been doing since 1954. And I would encourage everyone to not only join AW, but if you can afford it, up your rate. Become a life member or become an indoor club member or get involved and volunteer. Just AW is part of your team.
Thank you for listening to The Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button and click follow on our Facebook page so that we know that you're out there. I'm also looking for more stories. If you know of an interesting non-fatal river accident or rescue, send me a few details by email, safetybreak@gmail.com. It doesn't have to be dramatic or life-threatening, just something that we all might be able to learn from. I'll see if we can turn it into an episode. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the river.